Good evening, Keith. It's Hannah Tuahini here, and this is my presentation on the executive branch of government. New Zealand's government is distributed into three branches. This allows for the separation of powers and prevention of overly centralised control. The branches include Parliament, the executive, and the judiciary. Parliament makes the law, the executive administers the law, and the judiciary interprets the law through the courts. Now, the branch of government of my primary interest is the executive. I will be analysing principles central to this branch, including taxation and planning, chains of responsibility and accountability, and financial and performance accounting. These principles are central to the running of the executive and are pervasive concepts throughout the New Zealand government system. The executive branch of government has a hierarchical structure, starting with the Prime Minister who heads Cabinet, then Cabinet filled with ministers, public departments, and then local councils. This is the basic outline of the chain of responsibility for the executive branch. The executive branch wields a large proportion of power in the governmental system, even with the separation of powers. This results in accountability being a pivotal area of focus. The Oxford Dictionary describes accountability as the quality of being accountable, liability to give account of and answer for, discharge of duties or conduct and responsibility. This definition indicates that accountability is complex and covers a variety of notions, which can make defining how someone is accountable very difficult. In the context of public services, however, it is generally focused on making sure employees find the best use of public resources with minimal transaction costs that benefit all stakeholders fairly. Accountability itself can take many forms. In the article Sinclair 1995, it was described as follows: professional accountability, public, managerial, professional, and personal accountability. The accountabilities most relevant to the executive branch include political, public, managerial, and professional. All are related to the effective and transparent management of the executive's resources. The accountability system in the core public sector management system consists of a series of accountability relationships. Firstly, between the executive and Parliament. The relationships within the executive include between ministers individually and cabinet and the ministers collectively. Also, departmental chief executives and their ministers, and employees and chief executives. Accountability derives from the delegation of responsibility for a task, function, or role. Associated with delegation is how the responsibility will be exercised and a liability to account for how that responsibility or duty is to be carried out. Once the responsibilities have been delegated, a system of reporting is set. Reporting is a set of arrangements for providing information or an account of the exercise of the responsibilities. One party is accountable to another in the sense that one of the parties has the right to call upon the other party to give an account of how the responsibilities were in fact discharged. This involves explaining, justifying, and explaining what is currently being done. It puts an onus on those reporting to keep good records so as to be ready to explain. The accountability relationships described are also facilitated through the delegation of responsibility. Laws have also been implemented to aid accountability in governmental systems, including the Official Information Act of 1982, which means official information must be released to the public unless there is a good reason not to. The New Zealand Bill of Rights Act 1990, which means that the government can be taken to court over breaches of civil and political rights. The Human Rights Act of 1993, which means people can make legal claims that legislation was not consistent with their right to freedom from discrimination. Implementing strategies to keep employees accountable is not sufficient if it's unclear on who's responsible for what. Who is to be held to the set standards and performance measures is critical. This has led to a large shift in focus in New Zealand government over recent decades to clarify all job roles. This includes setting clear performance measures for each individual role. This has also increasingly separated power and allows employees to better and more effectively achieve their goals without being pushed on by other people's agendas. A principal requirement of the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet is to maintain organisational resilience and effectiveness so that it can best carry out its varied functions in support of the democratically elected and constitutional leadership of the nation. In the current economic circumstances, it is even more essential that the department is focused on what's important to the Prime Minister and his colleagues, and that high quality services are being provided in an efficient, responsive and coordinated manner. Planning in the executive branch to accomplish an effective delivery of functions is therefore essential. Firstly, the goals of the government must be set. This was done in the 2012 to 2016 Statement of Intent for the Executive Branch, and this is outlined as follows. To build a competitive and stronger economy, to manage the government's finances and return to surplus in 2014/2015, to build better public services that all New Zealanders rely on, and to rebuild Christchurch and the Canterbury economy. Next, appropriate plans must be put in place to accomplish these goals with regular checking of performance against set measures and accountability checks. To ensure that the executive government is well conducted, the organisational priorities for the department relate mainly to sustaining operational resilience, generating efficiencies so that financial constraints can be measured, and ensuring that high quality staff are available and maintaining high standards of performance and security. Now, all plans set in place by the executive must be adaptable and employees must be open to change, as the core role of the executive government is to support the Prime Minister and his elected ministers. However, the Prime Minister and the party in power can change every 3 years. Hence, all infrastructure must be adaptable. Taxation is administered by the executive, with the Treasury and Inland Revenue being key players. The Treasury forecasts tax revenue expected and thus facilitates the planning function of the executive branch in regards to budgets. And then Inland Revenue is responsible for collection of tax revenue, ensuring to an acceptable level set by government that it is collected with a certain level of accuracy. When a new government is elected, this in turn gives government the ability to collect taxes, but also holds government to an accountability to ensure that the taxes are being put to their best uses with minimal transaction costs. This all requires highly in-depth planning and consultation. Hence, the planning function and taxation are intertwined concepts. Now, financial accounting is the planning and documentation of financial resources. Since the executive branch is responsible for administering laws, the funds required and the methods of obtaining and administering the funds require heavy amounts of financial accounting. Some examples of financial accounting include estimating revenues and expenditures, bookkeeping and producing reports for budgetary control, submitting accounts to the Auditor General for audit, budget submissions to Parliament, receiving budget submissions from Parliament to Cabinet, scrutinising expenditure and revenue collections of the executive, audits of financial statements, and receiving audited accounts for whole of government and individual agencies. Now, this is where I will end the first video, and in the next video we will continue on to performance accounting and how that relates to financial accounting in government.